What if the real revolution of the future isn't technological at all? What if it's something far older than civilization? Something buried deep inside the human mind, waiting for the right moment to break open. Imagine, for just a second, that the next great leap for humanity isn't about machines getting smarter, but about you waking up. Not the kind of awakening people post motivational quotes about, but a seismic internal shift. Something ancient, something ecological, something that alters the very shape of consciousness itself. Terence McKenna believed that the future of the human mind is not a straight road, but a spiraling evolution, an unfolding that is both biological and mythological, a transformation with roots deeper than history and branches stretching far beyond the digital age. And if his intuition was even half correct, then we are standing at the very edge of a cliff we don't fully understand, one step away from a kind of mental ecology we're only beginning to sense. McKenna had this rare ability to speak about consciousness as if he were describing a living ecosystem, a landscape with rivers, storms, seasons, an entire species of thought evolving and interacting in ways we can barely observe. To him, the mind wasn't a machine, wasn't a container, wasn't a static collection of memories. It was a garden, constantly growing, constantly decaying, constantly reorganizing itself. And like any garden, it could thrive or collapse, depending on how we tend it, what we feed it, and whether we understand the invisible forces shaping its growth. He believed that culture, nature, technology, symbols, stories, and even silence, all of it formed the ecology in which the mind lives. And when that ecology is unbalanced, humanity loses its way. But if the mind has an ecology, then it must also have a future. And that future, according to McKenna, isn't random. It isn't chaotic. It isn't meaningless. It is evolving towards something we can feel in moments of intuition, déjà vu, synchronicity, or when we brush against the unmistakable sense that reality is far stranger and more alive than we've been told. Imagine your thoughts not as isolated sparks inside your skull, but as part of a vast interconnected field, one where ideas move like weather patterns, where creativity behaves like lightning, where insight appears like a sudden rainfall that nourishes an entire inner forest. This was McKenna's vision, the mind as a biosphere. And in that biosphere, every experience, every memory, every symbol, every dream plays a role. Nothing is wasted. Everything cycles. Everything evolves. In this view, consciousness itself becomes the ultimate frontier, not outer space, not the ocean, not artificial intelligence. The real wilderness is internal, and the explorers of the future are those who dare to map it. And yet, despite how mystical it sounds, McKenna wasn't trying to separate consciousness from nature. In fact, he was doing the opposite. To him, the separation of mind and world was the greatest illusion of modern civilization. Ancient cultures, he said, knew better. They understood that human awareness was woven into the living fabric of ecosystems, seasons, plants, animals, and cosmic rhythms. They saw mind not as a human possession, but as a shared phenomenon. The forest dreamed through them. The sky spoke through symbols. The earth revealed itself in visions. The natural world wasn't out there. It was in here, shaping the very structure of experience. The question, then, is simple but terrifying. What happens when a species forgets this connection? What happens when the ecology of the mind grows polluted, cluttered with noise, disconnected from nature, hypnotized by speed, drowning in information but starving for wisdom? McKenna believed this is exactly the crisis of our age. Not a crisis of technology, not a crisis of politics, a crisis of meaning, a crisis born from the loss of our interior wilderness, the collapse of our own mental biodiversity. When the stories we live by become shallow, when our culture becomes repetitive and hollow, when our imagination no longer stretches beyond the next distraction, the ecology of the mind begins to wither. And yet, this is where McKenna's vision becomes hopeful, visionary, almost prophetic. He believed that moments of collapse are often the precursor to transformation. Just as forests burn to make way for new growth, civilizations go through periods of dissolution before new paradigms emerge. And beneath the surface of our current turbulence, social, psychological, environmental, he sensed the early signs of a coming shift, a new kind of consciousness, more connected, more ecological, more aware of the hidden architecture of mind. To understand this, McKenna often pointed to the deep relationship between mind and environment, not just physically, but symbolically, spiritually, cognitively. He argued that our consciousness did not evolve in isolation. It evolved alongside the natural world, shaped by the rhythms of the earth, influenced by what he called the plant teachers, organisms that ancient cultures used not to escape reality, but to engage with reality on deeper and more complex levels. But even without referring to anything controversial, the point remains: human consciousness is not a closed system. It responds to its environment, reflects it, and in many ways mirrors it. When ecosystems collapse, our inner worlds collapse. When ecosystems flourish, our imagination expands. This relationship becomes clearer when we consider how modern life has shifted the balance. We live indoors, surrounded by artificial stimuli, overwhelmed by data, but cut off from the very environments that shaped our species for hundreds of thousands of years. Our senses evolved to track the wind, the movement of water, the sound of animals, the shifting colors of the sky. And yet today those same senses are locked into glowing rectangles, fed an endless stream of symbols that offer information but not insight, stimulation but not depth. McKenna warned that this creates a kind of cognitive starvation, a narrowing of psychic range, a shrinking of our perceptual horizon. But if the environment shapes the mind, then changing the environment, even subtly, can change consciousness. A single moment of silence can interrupt years of mental noise. A walk in nature can reset the nervous system. A new perspective can rewire entire belief structures. And if individuals can shift, societies can shift. This is the ecology of mind, the recognition that thought exists in a larger system, that consciousness evolves in networks, that ideas affect like seeds. McKenna believed we are moving toward an era where this interconnectedness becomes undeniable. He felt that consciousness was accelerating, complexifying, moving toward some kind of threshold event, an evolutionary leap, not in biology but in mind. Whether or not we take his predictions literally, the metaphor remains powerful. Humanity is approaching a point of transformation where old structures fall away and new patterns emerge. The question is whether we will guide this transformation consciously or be dragged into it. And we can already feel this shift. The turbulence of the world today isn't just political or environmental. It's psychological. People everywhere are sensing that the old narratives no longer hold, that the world is changing faster than our stories can adapt, that something is pulling us toward a new way of thinking. Some experience it as anxiety, some as excitement, some as confusion. But beneath all of it lies the same truth. The ecology of mind is reorganizing itself. McKenna saw this not as chaos, but as the birth pains of a new paradigm, a moment when humanity begins to reconnect with the deeper intelligence of nature, when consciousness expands beyond the isolated self, when we rediscover the mythic dimension of reality, the realm where meaning is alive, where imagination is a form of perception, where the boundary between mind and world becomes thin, porous, fluid. And this is where phase A ends, on the edge of the unknown, where the next part of the journey begins to unfold. The sense of approaching transformation does not arrive as a dramatic announcement, but as a subtle shift in how reality feels. It appears in the background of everyday life, in the tension between what is collapsing and what is emerging. This quiet movement inside the collective mind is the signal that a deeper layer of consciousness is beginning to activate. McKenna sensed that humanity was entering a phase where the structures of thought, identity, and meaning would begin to rearrange themselves in ways that mirror ecological processes. Slow at first, then exponential, then irreversible. The old frameworks of understanding lose coherence, making space for new patterns that arise organically, like green shoots pushing through cracked concrete. These shifts become visible when individuals begin noticing a growing urge to detach from the noise of modern culture. It is not escapism, but an instinctive correction, a movement toward internal balance. The mind begins to seek spaciousness. The nervous system starts craving harmony with something older and more natural than digital overstimulation. People sense that depth is missing from modern experience, that creativity feels constrained, that imagination has been reduced to consumption. This is not a failure of individuals, but a symptom of the larger imbalance within the mental ecosystem. And when a system falls out of harmony, every part of it resonates with the disturbance. McKenna believed that this resonance is a sign that the collective mind is preparing for reorganization. He saw human consciousness as capable of metamorphosis, similar to biological evolution, but operating on symbolic, conceptual, and visionary levels. As ecosystems reorganize after disruption, consciousness can do the same. When external structures become unstable, internal structures grow more fluid, allowing new forms of perception to take root. Old certainties dissolve, making space for new understandings that were previously inaccessible. One of McKenna's central insights was that consciousness does not expand through force, logic, or mechanical progression. It expands through novelty. Novelty is the engine of evolution, the catalyst that moves systems into new configurations, a sudden insight, a new symbol, a profound experience. These act like seeds that germinate in the psyche and spread through the collective imagination. Over time, these seeds reshape the mental landscape, altering the possibilities available to individuals and societies. McKenna saw this process happening throughout human history. Each cultural shift, driven by bursts of novelty that introduce new ways of being. In the present age, novelty appears in forms that blend the organic with the technological. The digital networks that span the planet are not separate from consciousness. They interact with it, accelerate it, and amplify it. They operate like extensions of the neural pathways that carry thought. McKenna suggested that tools, symbols, and technologies are not external artifacts, but expressions of mind itself, growing from the human imagination like fruit from a tree. The rapid emergence of these technologies signals an acceleration in the evolutionary pressure on consciousness. The more interconnected the world becomes, the more consciousness is forced to adapt to complexity, speed, and abstraction. But McKenna did not see this as a purely technological evolution. He viewed it as a moment when humanity must rediscover its forgotten relationship with nature. Hyperconnectivity without grounding becomes instability. Speed without depth becomes fragmentation. Intelligence without meaning becomes confusion. The ecology of mind requires balance between the inward and outward, the organic and synthetic, the logical and intuitive. When these elements coexist in harmony, consciousness becomes capable of extraordinary development. The future of the mind, in McKenna's view, involves integrating these dual forces. Technology becomes a mirror that reflects the complexity of the psyche. Nature becomes a teacher that restores equilibrium. Symbolic imagination becomes the bridge between these realms, weaving together logic and myth, science and spirit, perception and intuition. As these elements converge, the mind undergoes a form of cognitive synthesis that allows it to operate on multiple layers of reality simultaneously. This synthesis is not a theoretical idea. It manifests as a growing sense of interconnectedness that individuals feel in moments of clarity, creativity, or insight. The boundaries between self and world soften. the mind becomes more permeable to patterns occurring both internally and externally. Thought begins to flow with a rhythm that matches the deeper currents of nature. This shift doesn't require mysticism. It only requires attention to the subtle ways the environment influences perception. McKenna believed that this sensitivity is crucial for navigating the coming transformation. When consciousness becomes attuned to the larger patterns shaping existence, it can move through change with coherence rather than fear. It can adapt without losing itself. It can evolve without forgetting its origins. This attunement allows individuals to sense the direction in which the collective mind is moving and align themselves with its unfolding. Part of this alignment involves recognizing that meaning arises not from external systems, but from the internal experience of being alive. Cultural structures, technologies, and institutions may support or obstruct this process, but they cannot replace it. Meaning grows from direct engagement with existence, through creativity, reflection, connection, and awareness. McKenna emphasized that the inner world contains the tools needed to navigate uncertainty because consciousness is inherently capable of renewal. It is not static, but dynamic, constantly reorganizing itself in response to experience. As the collective mind moves toward greater complexity, individuals begin to experience their own thoughts and emotions as part of a larger process. This does not diminish individuality, but contextualizes it within a broader field of intelligence. Each person becomes a node in a network of evolving ideas, contributing to the larger movement of consciousness without being overwhelmed by it. This sense of participation creates resilience, clarity, and purpose. McKenna envisioned a future where the mind becomes increasingly ecological in its functioning. Ideas would grow organically, supported by diversity rather than uniformity. Creativity would flourish through collaboration rather than competition. Culture would operate like a living system that adapts, regenerates, and evolves. In such a system, consciousness becomes more expansive, flexible, and responsive to the challenges of the world. The journey toward this future does not follow a linear path. It unfolds in waves, surges, and shifts. Periods of confusion precede moments of insight. Instability opens the door to transformation. As the structures of the old world deteriorate, new forms of thinking rise to take their place. This process is not easy, but it is natural. It is the rhythm of evolution. The shift that McKenna anticipated is not an external event, but an internal reorientation. It emerges through the way individuals perceive themselves, each other, and the world. As more people tap into deeper layers of awareness, the collective field of consciousness becomes more coherent. This coherence allows for new possibilities to emerge, possibilities that reflect a more integrated and interconnected worldview. Humanity stands in this transitional space, moving from fragmentation to integration, from isolation to interconnectedness, from mechanistic thought to ecological awareness. The mind begins to sense that it is part of something vast, intelligent, and alive. And as this realization spreads, consciousness continues its silent evolution toward a future it has been preparing for since the beginning of time. The momentum of this transformation gathers quietly, like pressure building beneath the surface of the earth before a tectonic shift. Beneath ordinary routines, beneath cultural noise, beneath the static of everyday life, something is reorganizing the structure of awareness. This reorganization expresses itself through heightened sensitivity, deeper introspection, and a growing recognition that the conventional ways of thinking no longer satisfy the complexity of the human experience. It is not a rejection of the world, but a recognition that the world is far more layered and alive than our inherited narratives allow. As this awareness deepens, individuals begin to move beyond the rigid boundaries of identity that once seemed unshakable. They start to sense that their thoughts, emotions, and perceptions are not isolated phenomena but interconnected, expressions of a larger dynamic system. This sense of connection is not an abstract philosophical idea. It unfolds as a lived experience. In subtle moments, a new clarity arises, an ability to see patterns where previously there was only chaos, to feel meaning in places that once seemed empty, to recognize intelligence woven into the structure of existence itself. McKenna believed that this capacity for pattern recognition is one of the defining features of evolving consciousness. When the mind becomes more ecological in nature, it begins to perceive relationships rather than fragments. It learns to track subtle linkages between internal states and external events. It recognizes synchronicities not as accidents, but as expressions of a deeper coherence running through the layers of reality. This coherence guides perception, shapes decisions, and reconfigures the entire field of thought. As more people develop this inner sensitivity, the collective mind begins to shift. Social structures that once depended on linear logic start to strain under the weight of emerging complexity. Cultural narratives that once felt stable begin to dissolve. Systems built on outdated assumptions struggle to adapt. This dissolution is not a sign of collapse, but a sign of evolution, a natural consequence of consciousness outgrowing the frameworks that once sustained it. When the internal world becomes richer than the external narratives, change becomes inevitable. This is the threshold McKenna described, a moment when species-level transformation becomes possible because enough minds awaken to their interconnected nature. At this point, creativity becomes not just a personal ability, but a collective force. Imagination takes on a structural role, shaping the direction of cultural evolution. People begin to sense that the future is not something predetermined, but something actively formed by the quality of their attention, the depth of their insight, and the strength of their inner coherence. This realization marks a pivotal shift in human identity. Instead of seeing themselves as passive observers in a chaotic universe, individuals begin to experience themselves as active participants in a living system. The boundary between inner experience and outer reality becomes more fluid, allowing new forms of meaning to emerge. This fluidity is not confusion, but freedom. The freedom to perceive reality not as a static container, but as an unfolding process that responds to the state of consciousness observing it. McKenna often spoke about the power of language in shaping this evolution. Language is not merely a tool for communication, but a technology of perception. It structures thought, molds belief, and shapes the boundaries of what individuals consider possible. As consciousness evolves, language must evolve with it. Old words carry old assumptions. New forms of expression become necessary to articulate the expanding interior landscape of the mind. Poetic, symbolic, and visionary forms of language begin to rise, not as artistic embellishments, but as accurate descriptions of deeper layers of experience. Through this evolution of language, humanity gains access to new dimensions of understanding. Symbols become portals rather than static icons. Metaphors become maps that guide perception into unexplored territories. Storytelling becomes a vehicle for transmitting insight that logical explanation cannot convey. Culture itself becomes a living organism, capable of renewal, adaptation, and growth. This renewal is essential for the survival of any ecosystem, and the ecology of mind is no exception. In this unfolding process, technology continues to play a paradoxical role. On one hand, it accelerates complexity, increasing the cognitive load on individuals. On the other hand, it provides unprecedented opportunities for connection, collaboration, and the exchange of ideas. According to McKenna, technology is not an enemy of consciousness, but a reflection of its unfolding potential. It acts as a catalyst, challenging individuals to expand their inner capacities in order to navigate the external acceleration. When used with awareness, Technology becomes a partner in the evolution of mind rather than a distraction from it. The key is integration. Without integration, the mind becomes overwhelmed by the noise of the digital world. With integration, the mind learns to navigate complexity with coherence. Integration allows individuals to maintain contact with the deeper rhythms of nature while engaging with the innovations of the modern age. McKenna envisioned the future of consciousness as a synthesis of these realms, where the natural and the technological merge into a harmonious ecosystem that supports the flourishing of creativity, insight, and wisdom. This synthesis requires individuals to cultivate an inner stillness that allows them to perceive the subtle intelligence operating beneath the surface of experience. Stillness does not imply withdrawal, it implies presence. It allows for clarity in the midst of chaos, for discernment in the midst of information overload, for wisdom in the midst of uncertainty. It reconnects the mind to its ecological roots, grounding it in the rhythms that sustain both inner and outer life. As this grounding becomes more widespread, consciousness begins to stabilize at a higher level of complexity. People start to experience a new kind of clarity, a sense of orientation within the vastness of existence. This clarity is not based on simplistic narratives or external authority, but on direct experience of the interconnected nature of reality. It provides a foundation for navigating the uncertainties of the future with confidence rather than fear. McKenna believed that the ultimate potential of this shift lies in the emergence of a global mind, a network of interconnected individuals whose collective insight becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This global mind is not a centralized entity, but a decentralized field of shared awareness. It arises when enough individuals begin to think ecologically rather than mechanically, intuitively rather than reactively, creatively rather than conventionally. In such a field, inspiration spreads rapidly, insight multiplies, and cultural evolution accelerates. The movement toward this global coherence is not something dramatic or revolutionary in appearance. It happens quietly, through millions of personal awakenings, each one adding a thread to the larger tapestry of human thought. It unfolds through curiosity, through the willingness to explore, through the recognition that consciousness is capable of far more than we have been conditioned to believe. It grows every time someone chooses awareness over distraction, creativity over conformity, insight over habit. And as this expansion continues, the ecology of mind begins to reveal its true potential. Consciousness becomes a living landscape capable of regeneration, complexity, and continuous transformation. It develops resilience in the face of change, adaptability in the face of uncertainty, and clarity in the face of confusion. Through this resilience, humanity gains the capacity to navigate the challenges of the future with wisdom, grounding, and imagination. The expansion of consciousness into a regenerative, interconnected landscape marks the beginning of a new era in human experience, one in which the internal and external are no longer perceived as separate domains, but as reflections of a single unified process. As this understanding deepens, individuals begin to notice that the boundary between personal transformation and collective evolution is porous. A shift in one mind subtly influences the field around it. A moment of insight sends ripples through the shared fabric of perception. A breakthrough experienced in silence becomes part of the architecture of the future, shaping possibilities far beyond the individual who encountered it. This level of awareness creates a profound sense of responsibility, not in the moralistic sense, but in the ecological sense. Every thought, every intention, every act of perception becomes part of a living network that influences the whole. This recognition changes how individuals move through the world. It fosters a deeper care for relationships, for creativity, for the environment, for the stories that shape collective meaning. It leads to an understanding that personal alignment is not a luxury, but a contribution to the stability of the larger mental ecosystem. When one person cultivates clarity, the entire field becomes more coherent. When one person heals, the collective tension lessens. When one person awakens, the path becomes a little easier for everyone. As this dynamic grows, humanity begins to sense the emergence of a deeper intelligence guiding the flow of events. Not an external force, not a mythic deity, but the innate intelligence of consciousness itself. This intelligence expresses itself through patterns of innovation, through moments of cultural synchronicity, through sudden shifts in collective awareness that seem to arise without a central source. It's the intelligence that causes ideas to appear simultaneously in different parts of the world. The intelligence that pushes societies toward transformation when old structures become too rigid to support further growth. This subtle guiding force is what McKenna believed was steering the evolution of the human mind toward a more integrated and holistic state. This evolution becomes visible in the way people begin to question the assumptions that once governed their lives. The linear narratives of progress and decline lose their power as individuals recognize the cyclical patterns that underlie all forms of development. The mechanical worldview that dominated the industrial age gives way to a systems-based understanding of reality, one in which relationships matter more than isolated facts, and patterns convey more truth than linear sequences. People begin to see that meaning is not an external commodity, but an internal emergence, rising from the interaction between perception, imagination, and experience. This shift unfolds, a new kind of creativity begins to arise, one that is not driven by ego, ambition, or competition, but by an almost instinctual desire to explore the boundaries of consciousness. This creativity is not limited to art or science. It permeates everyday life. It appears in how people solve problems, how they communicate, how they connect, how they adapt. It becomes a natural response to the growing complexity of the world. Just as nature responds to environmental pressure with bursts of biodiversity, consciousness responds to evolutionary pressure with bursts of innovation and insight. This creativity is essential for navigating the transition into the future. It provides the tools, the ideas, and the flexibility needed to move through uncertainty with grace. It allows individuals to remain grounded even as the structures around them shift. It creates opportunities for new forms of community, new ways of thinking, new modes of being. McKenna believed that this creative impulse would become the defining characteristic of the evolving human mind, shaping cultures that value imagination as deeply as they value logic, cultures that understand that the unknown is not a threat but an invitation. As these new forms take shape, the relationship between humanity and nature undergoes a profound transformation. Instead of treating the environment as a resource to be exploited, people begin to see it as a living partner in the evolution of consciousness. The forest becomes a teacher, the ocean becomes a mirror, the sky becomes a reminder of vastness. Nature is no longer something separate from the human mind. It becomes recognized as part of the same ecological continuum. This recognition fosters a deep reverence for the natural world, not as an abstract ideal, but as a direct expression of the intelligence that shapes all life. This renewed relationship with nature brings balance to the accelerating pace of technological innovation. Instead of being overwhelmed by artificial systems, individuals learn to integrate them into a grounded, ecologically informed worldview. Technology becomes a tool for expanding awareness rather than narrowing it. It becomes a medium through which consciousness can explore its own complexity, connect with others, and extend its creative capacity. In this integrated state, the tension between the organic and the digital dissolves, replaced by a synergy that supports the emergence of higher forms of cognition. At this stage, humanity begins to move into a realm where the boundaries between imagination and reality become increasingly fluid. The mind becomes more adept at navigating symbolic landscapes, more comfortable with ambiguity, more willing to embrace paradox. This fluidity opens the door to new forms of perception that allow individuals to sense patterns that were previously hidden. Intuition becomes sharper, insight becomes more rapid, creativity becomes more effortless. These capacities were always present in the human mind, but they remained dormant until the conditions of culture and consciousness aligned to activate them. McKenna believed that the activation of these dormant capacities would lead to what he called an evolutionary crescendo, a moment when consciousness becomes capable of perceiving itself fully for the first time. Not as a collection of thoughts, not as a set of memories, not as a psychological construct, but as a living, self-organizing phenomenon woven into the fabric of reality. In this state, the mind becomes aware of its own depth, its own complexity, its own potential. It becomes capable of moving beyond the limitations of linear time, beyond the constraints of rigid identity, beyond the illusions that once defined the boundaries of reality. This crescendo is not a single moment, but a process, one that unfolds through countless individual awakenings, each one adding momentum to the collective transformation. It happens through quiet realizations, through moments of clarity, through shifts in perspective that seem small but alter everything. It happens when individuals abandon old patterns and embrace new ones, when they choose awareness over automation, when they open themselves to the deeper intelligence guiding their evolution. As this process accelerates, humanity enters a space of profound possibility. The old maps no longer apply. The old limitations lose their power. The mind becomes a frontier more vast than any physical landscape, offering pathways into the unknown that no previous generation could access. This expansion does not require escape from the world, but deeper engagement with it. It requires courage, curiosity, and a willingness to explore the uncharted territories within one's own awareness. It is in this space, this vast unfolding field of consciousness, that the final insight of McKenna's vision comes into focus. The evolution of the mind is not merely a journey forward into the future. It is a return to something ancient, something original, something that existed long before culture, long before history, long before identity. It is a return to the primal intelligence that shaped the first spark of awareness, the intelligence that guided life from simple cells to complex organisms, from instinct to imagination, from survival to meaning.
This return is not regression, it is integration. It is the moment when the future and the ancient meet, when the linear and the cyclical merge, when the human mind remembers its place within the cosmic process. It is the moment when consciousness becomes fully ecological, aware of its roots in nature, aware of its partnership with technology, aware of its responsibility to the collective, aware of its connection to the deeper intelligence permeating existence. And it is in this realization that the powerful conclusion emerges, not as an ending, but as a culmination, a recognition, a transformation. The future of the mind is not something humanity must wait for. It is something unfolding now, in every thought that expands beyond habit, in every moment of awareness that disrupts the inertia of unconscious patterns, in every act of imagination that reaches into the unknown. The ecology of mind's future is not a distant horizon, but a living process, emerging through each individual who chooses to participate in the evolution of consciousness. The transformation is already underway. The momentum is building, the path is opening, and the future of the human mind, complex, ecological, interconnected, and unimaginably vast, continues to unfold with every breath, every thought, every moment of awareness that dares to reach beyond the known world and into the infinite landscape of possibility.